Well, welcome in, everybody, and happy Tuesday. It is another edition of GC Live, Talking Tuesday Nights. He's Intern Joe. I'm Mike Yuva, and the Bulldogs are the next opponent for South Carolina, as the Gamecocks will be headed over to Athens this week to take on the number one ranked Georgia Bulldogs between the hedges. So we have a lot to get to with that. We will look back at the week that was, though, against Furman and talk about some of the positives that came out of that. Obviously, one of those being the performance from Spencer Rattler, as he was named not co, he was named the outright offensive SEC Player of the Week. So we'll get into that as well. But as we do every Tuesday, going to let Joe lead things off. Joe, I know you've been a little bit under the weather.
A little bit.
Had a chance to be able to get caught up on some of the press conferences or any of the little tweets from today. Anything stand out from you with South Carolina on this Tuesday?
No, not really, Mike. I didn't get a chance to watch a whole lot of the pressers, but obviously because I am a little under the weather, but pulling a Jordan flu game today. Apologies if I sound stuffed up or look like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, but we are out here doing this. No, so from what I did get to watch, I was really impressed with the Carry-On Joyner. As always, I think he really does a good job in the media. His comments about Amarian Brown and Spencer, saying that he told us, I mean, he's right. He did tell us at the beginning of the year how good Spencer was going to be. So I was impressed with that. Didn't get to watch a whole lot of Shane. So I'm sure we're going to show some clips, so I will chime in after that. But, yeah, Mike, we're on the mend. We were feeling a little bit better. So, yeah, we should be good to go for everything this weekend.
So I'll just go right into it since you didn't have a chance to really catch things. I think couple things, a little hints there and here and there. We saw the two deep that came out, and as we've said many times before, this thing means absolutely nothing that comes out on Monday. Because if you looked at the two deep, a lot of what we saw yesterday, very similar to what it looked like going into last week. However, as we saw, that wasn't the case with the offensive line. That wasn't the case with other positions. That's why I say that there were little hints today as to what Shane Beamer is planning on doing this weekend. And what I mean by that is with the offensive line, right? We saw Luedecke and Babalade out there, big tree, last weekend against Furman. And I thought at that point when he came in, as well as Trevon Baugh, I felt like that was the changing point for the momentum for South Carolina. I felt like at that point, from an offensive standpoint, they really started to click. So I say that because I'm not going to be shocked this week if we see both those freshmen out there.
Yeah.
Again, just listening to some of the things that Beamer said, despite what this stupid thing is saying, the two deep. So I lead off with that. And the second thing I would say, too, is from listening to Marcellus Dial, despite the fact that Beamer in his opening statement said that he wasn't going to get further into, and I'm kind of paraphrasing here, but get into it as far as the guys who are questionable for Saturday. He didn't go down the list. He usually gives you an update. He said based on what he told us on Sunday with those guys, and I'll pull up the list right here to make sure everyone is caught up to speed on that. That does not include Juice Wells, though. And that will be another player we will talk about today because Juice was a requested player to speak today, but him along with Juju McDowell did not. And there's no reason given other than the fact that they did not speak with the media today. So Marcellus Dial mentioned that Nick Gargiulo is getting closer to getting back out there. Perhaps he could be out there this weekend. So again, the biggest takeaways for me were the little hints that we heard today, whether it be from Shane Beamer about the offensive lineman, whether it be from Dial talking about Nick Gargiulo. This Gamecock team, they have been plagued by injuries to start the year. They were plagued going back to last year. They were plagued in the spring, obviously at left tackle with Jalen Nichols. This is a Gamecock team that needs everyone ready, and that includes Juice Wells, if they want to be able to pull off the upset. And while this would be arguably the biggest upset that they have had, including Clemson, including Tennessee, going back to last year, Joe, as Dial mentioned today, no one gave them a shot in those other two games. No one's giving this team a shot this weekend. They are nearly 4 touchdown point underdogs, for crying out loud. That's even more than back in 2019 when South Carolina went down to Athens and they pulled off the upset, which, oh, by the way, not including the coaching staff, which you have like guys like Jalen Foster and Dickerson on the team. Only 6 players are on this roster, active roster, who are on that 2019 team when they beat Georgia. So, look, you need to be able to be as healthy as possible. But regardless of the health, Joe, how do you feel about the offensive line, especially with those two true freshmen out there?
I mean, is it wrong to say I feel good about it going into Georgia?
No, it's okay to be positive, despite what some people wanted to say week 1 and cancel the season.
I really do. I mean, I feel or a little bit more positive about it than I did after week 1. I mean, Mike, we said this Tuesday. I've said this on my podcast, and we said this in the post-game show. I mean, I felt that this offensive line needed a tune-up game, maybe 2, to kind of get in rhythm and actually do things right with a lesser opponent to get things, on track and be able to rep out the right things in game. I think that Furman game was exactly what you needed for your offensive line. I think they are back on track. And it's exactly what Vershawn Lee and Nick Gargiulo said last week, right? They backed up everything they said they were going to do. So I certainly feel positive about it just in terms of internally. Like I think obviously Georgia is Georgia, the number 1 team in the country, and have one of the best defenses in the country, let alone defensive fronts. So it's going to be a challenge, but they know this, right? They understand now, though, what it's like to rep out the right things in game. They know what they need to do. And now with the freshmen coming in, at least they have an idea of who will be in the rotation and just who they're going to be playing with. I mean, week 1, you didn't know who was going to go down with an injury. I'm knocking on wood here. So Gamecock fans, if somebody goes down, don't blame me. But I'm knocking on wood here. But now you know who is kind of gonna be in the rotation. You know who you're gonna be playing with. Week 1, you didn't necessarily know that, right? You were playing your starters, trying to get them as many reps together as you could to build that camaraderie. And now you've seen it with the injuries. They're repping in a lot of different guys, and I think that helps in the long run. When you're playing with a bunch of different guys at offensive line, you're starting to learn their tendencies, especially these freshmen that, I mean, Nick Gargiulo is a transfer. Vershawn Lee's been here forever, but I mean, you're learning new tendencies with these new players, and as you start to get accustomed to it, you play better. And as intimidating as Georgia's defensive front is, I think this Furman game for this offensive line, being able to rep out the right things in game, have it work, and have the offense produce what it did, and you're able to see what happens when you can put it all together if you're this offensive line. And you know what you're going to face in Georgia. You know what you have to do. And so I have a little bit more confidence. Had they played Georgia week 2, I don't think I'd be saying this, but yeah, I think now that they know who they're going to be playing with, rotation wise, and just repping that out, I think that's a huge thing. And being able to do the right things in game is also a very, very big thing. Mike, I mean, you played college football. Walk me through that a little bit. Like, I mean, I'm assuming that helps, right? Like, when you play a lesser opponent and rep out the better things, like that helps.
Well, I mean, it's just like anything in life. And it's interesting that you mentioned Nick Gargiulo, because just last night we had an opportunity to have an exclusive interview with him, part of Garden Nights Unplugged over at CB18. If you hadn't had an opportunity to come on by and check that out, I highly recommend coming on out. We had Gargiulo as well as Gamecock women's soccer star at Barry out there. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to play some of the interview that we had with Nick last night. That interview so far, other than being able to listen to it as a podcast, if you're not a subscriber on Gamecock Central, you haven't had a chance to actually see the video of it because we haven't uploaded it yet. We just wanted to be able to give it to our subscribers. If you're not a subscriber, honestly, take advantage of what the specials are going on right now. You can get it for half the year for 50% off, or you can just sign up for 1 month for $1. So if you're new to the Gamecock Central game, as far as, what's on the website, the forum, all that kind of stuff, it's like having another community, really.
Also, shout out to my doctor at the health center this morning. Was a subscriber. I took my mask down, and we were talking college football. I'm like, yeah, I cover it for a living and whatever. And
I had no idea what the heck where you were going with that. You're like, shout out to my doctor.
No, from the health center. He's a subscriber from Gamecock Central. I'm like,
all right.
Call me Intern Joe over there, and he's like,
all right, shout out, Doc. All right. Well, we're gonna have some of that interview with Nick Gargiulo coming up, because a lot of the things that you just mentioned right there, it made me think about what he was talking about last night with the freshmen.
Yeah.
But on top of that, he also told me was, when you go into when you go into the first game of the year, but especially when you're going up against the caliber of talent that you have against North Carolina, you're going to have a sense of how good you are. You're going to have a sense of your strengths and your weaknesses. But until you actually get out there on the field, like the old saying goes that Mike Tyson says, and I've said it here before, everyone has a game plan until you get punched in the face. And with South Carolina, that first game of the season, it was evident that when they got punched in the face, there were things that they just weren't prepared for. Now, if you want to blame that on the coaching staff, blame it on the coaching staff. They get paid a lot of money. That's an easy thing to do. Blame it on the coaching staff. You want to blame it on some of the players? That's okay too. It's part of it. You sign up to go play in the SEC. You sign up to play some big boy football. A lot of these guys now, I shouldn't say a lot, some of these guys, but are making a lot of money. But a lot of these guys are starting to get compensated in some shape, way, or form now. So it's okay. Because I felt like for so many years, people are so afraid to be critical of players. It's okay to be critical of players. All right. We all know where the line is. It's not professional sports, but at the same time, too, it's okay to be critical of student athletes. So I bring that up because there was a sense, just based on talking with Nick, that there were things that maybe some blind spots, if you will, some of the weaknesses that they weren't either aware of or they just really weren't aware of how bad they were. And they were able to kind of get things corrected last week. So it's being able to build off that confidence. And now you have a better sense of what your team's all about. It's only 1 week, right? It's only 1 week against Furman, but you have a better sense now of what your team's all about. And as you head into this next week against the best team that you arguably could be playing all season, you have to be able to figure out, okay, what worked last week against Furman? What were we able to correct in comparison to what we didn't do right against North Carolina? And will it be enough to be able to give us an opportunity to not only go out there and give ourselves a chance to win, but give ourselves a chance to be competitive? Because again, outside of, and I would assume, Joe, that there's people here in Columbia. I mean, I haven't put my prediction out, but when I have my prediction, I'm probably going to pick against the Gamecocks this week. I mean, that's just the reality of it. Yeah. It's there's going to be a lot of people, even in Columbia, that are going to be doubting them this weekend.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. And it is Georgia and it is in Athens. I think that's, two of the biggest things. I think South Carolina would be given a little bit more favor if this game were at Williams-Brice, considering the way.
What would you have the line at? What would you have the line at? It's same Georgia team, same South Carolina team playing Williams-Brice, same time. Yep.
What's the line for this week? I haven't checked.
27.5. It keeps going up and down, but it's around that 28 point.
I'd go as far as putting it at 17.
Oh, look at Joe.
Yeah.
I mean, you sure you're not? You sure the doc didn't give you the good meds today? 17.
17.
We're talking in hypotheticals here.
Even considering what happened last year. I think there's just more hope. You know what you're going to get out of your quarterback. You don't know what you're going to get out of your offensive line, granted, but you know what you're getting out of your defense as well. So I think going into this game last year with so many injury questions on defense, you knew they were going to score a lot of points. With Cam Smith, Darius Rush, I mean, half your secondary was out. That was when Nick Eamon played like the entire game and had a crap ton of tackles. So a 17, maybe like 20 even. I don't know. I just think if this game were at Williams-Brice, it'd be a little different. But, I mean, you're right. Same Georgia team, same South Carolina team. This Georgia team has looked beatable at times in the first quarter, but I don't think they opened the playbook at all in the first quarter against Ball State, and I can't even remember who they had week 1. But it's just, I agree, South Carolina is going to be big underdogs in this one, and if they don't start fast, Mike, it could get really, really, really ugly. There was a stat I saw today. I can't remember who it was by, so forgive me, but the stat was something around South Carolina is 20, or when they've beaten all the ranked teams in the Shane Beamer era, they've scored 20 or outscored opponents 21-7 in the first quarter. So for South Carolina, you have to jump out early and jump on this Dogs team to pressure them at home, make this a tight game throughout. Because if you don't, Georgia's going to swing first and they're going to swing hard. Brock Bowers, Carson Beck.
Joe, and that's something that Shane talked about today. And he said, I mean, look, it's much easier said than done. And that's been something that South Carolina has struggled with, especially on the road. When you look at what the Gamecocks have done under Shane Beamer against ranked opponents in the first quarter. So again, as Beamer said, it's much difficult. It's much harder, much easier said than done. But being able to go to Athens, it's going to make it that much more challenging because they are the number one team. They are the two-time defending national champs. And this isn't an excuse because we're seeing the comments here. And it's absolutely anything can happen. I mean, we saw that. I posted the video of Israel Mukwamu having 3 interceptions against Georgia 4 years ago. I mean, anything can happen. That team that year, no one gave that team a shot. No one gave that team a shot. And the only reason why the spread is up to 28 points, 27.5 is just because Georgia has been so dominant over the last 2 seasons, especially over the last 2 seasons, having won the national championship in back-to-back years. So, look, with the South Carolina team, we know that they're going to go only as far as number 7 takes them. But in order for Spencer Rattler to have a chance to be able to show off how talented he is, which we've seen over the last 2 weeks, despite the fact that he got, his head almost taken off week 1 against North Carolina. If you give him any type of chance to be able to go out there, anything can happen. So we're talking a lot about the offense. We'll get into the defense because don't get me wrong, that's a challenge within itself. However, being able to give yourself an opportunity offensively, you need to be able to do it because this is a Georgia team. This is a Georgia team that their MO has been their defense. And I know people don't want to hear about Will Muschamp and all that, but yes, he is the defensive coordinator. And it goes without saying that if you don't think he's going to be a little bit more geeked up for this game compared to other games, you're out of your mind. You're out of your mind. You don't, every coach, every player, they have things that motivate them just a little bit more. And if you don't think a former coach being able to play his team doesn't motivate him with just a little bit more, of course it does. And it's not just Muschamp, it's the players. They're aware of it too.
And Bobo as well. I mean,
Bobo's
he's on the other side of football.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, can't forget about him.
So, look, it goes without saying, but that is certainly something that needs to be looked at as we head into this weekend. I want to pull up a couple of the questions here. We will get we'll get into the interview with Nick Gargiulo in a little bit because, again, there was a lot of good things that he said, I felt like, about the offensive line, especially with the younger players and just his experience of playing college football at a young age. And everyone could talk about, well, it was Yale. He had a pretty good game last week. And he's going to have another good one this week. Okay? So we'll listen to Nick. We'll listen to Nick in a little bit. But here, what we got here? We have some of the ones that have starred so far. Let's pull those up. Will Sellers redshirt, just asking. We've talked about this a little bit at the beginning of preseason camp, Joe. And even going back into the summer after spring ball.
Yeah.
I think right now it's so difficult to pinpoint what will be the decision, not just for Sellers, but for a lot of these freshmen. And the reason being is, what does it look like this week, right? Like last week, you had an opportunity to go out there against Furman. There's a lot of comments. I know you actually mentioned it as well during the summer that Furman's possibly a game where you get some of those younger guys in there, including Sellers. Well, Sellers goes out there. And not only does he go 4 for 4, but he unloaded on an absolute bomb, an absolute dime in the back of the end zone, 60 yards. It was a 50-yard touchdown, but 60 yards through the air. So I say that because we've talked about the impact that he could potentially have in different packages, right? Putting him out there kind of like that Tebow package, having him get the short yardage situations, just how big he is. But when you're able to put out there on tape, and it doesn't matter who the heck you're playing, it could be Furman, it could be a D2 team, it could be a D3 team, it could be an NAIA school. It doesn't really matter who it is. When you're able to go out there and you show off the arm that he has in a real game, I'm not talking about a spring game, I'm not talking about high school, I'm not talking about a practice. when you're able to do what he did out there, that is going to grab the attention of defensive coordinators. If you don't think that Georgia is thinking just even a little bit this week, even just a little sliver about potentially what Sellers could do if he's out there on the field, you're out of your mind. You're out of your mind because of what took place last week. That is just one more thing that Georgia and other teams moving forward this season are going to have to worry about. So I say that because I feel like right now it's premature for me to say, well, they're going to redshirt him, or you know what? After what we saw last week, they're not going to redshirt him. I think we'll have a better idea after this weekend if he gets into the game in some type of package. And at that point, moving forward, right, you get to that Mississippi State game. That is essentially the third of the season. At that point, you have to ask yourself as a coaching staff, is it in the best interest of not only this individual, but is it in the best interest of our program to redshirt him or to play him this year? So I think South Carolina has an idea of what they want to do. And I think a couple things have to play out. And one of them has to be, what does this team do this week? If Sellers doesn't play at all this week, South Carolina struggles, and let's just say, he doesn't play against Mississippi State and they lose. That could change plans for them. But again, I truly believe they have an idea in place already, but it's based on how things go these next couple of weeks. If I'm South Carolina, though, based on what he was able to do the other night, I'm putting him out there. I'm finding a way to get him out there in packages. Now, I don't want to take out number 7, and that's the other part of it too, right? It's kind of like taking out Tom Brady. You don't want to take out your best player on the field. How many times are you going to take him off the field? How many snaps? I mean, if it's short yardage situations, is that worth burning a red shirt if you're using him? I'm making this up. 5 snaps a game moving forward. But those 5 snaps could be big ones. Again, what Tebow did his freshman year, and obviously it's very difficult to compare to the situation South Carolina is in because Florida went on to win the national championship that season.
Yeah. No, I think the Lenorris Sellers redshirt question is becoming more and more of a reality. I mean, personally, for me, I thought, he was going to be that quarterback of the future that you saw in games like Furman was electric, right? Let him go out there, shine, but redshirt him, wait for the future. But it's becoming more and more of a question, right? Like, are you really going to redshirt him? Could you actually use him? And Wes Mitchell and Tyler Head both brought this up on my show, The Walkthrough, on Sunday. Go listen, go watch YouTube, Spotify, whatnot. But they said they're like, red shirts don't matter nowadays with the transfer portal. You want to get guys out there. You're going to want to play them, right? And they said they both agreed that Lenorris is good enough to, go leave South Carolina after his junior year anyway. So why even worry about a red shirt and getting him an extra year of eligibility? And now after seeing all of, what he can do and maybe the possibility of throwing him in a package and then also them using Luke Doty at wide receiver tells me that they are very comfortable using Lenorris Sellers, and I wouldn't be shocked. I really wouldn't.
And the other thing too is, and it's, I don't know if I'd go as far as to say that I agree with Wes and Tyler on that he'll leave after his junior year. I think that's extremely I think that's very premature to say about that. But the reason I say that is because what he did the other night, he certainly shows what he's capable of doing. Yes. Now, what does it look like when he's up against an SEC defense? What does it look like when he goes out there and he is the guy? And now that they have film on you, right? I mean, you look back, it's not the greatest comparison, but when you go back and you look at the situation with Jason Brown, what did he do? He absolutely tore up Florida. Well, what happened the next week? Teams realized what Jason Brown liked to do. So there's still, the verdict is still out on Sellers in terms of certain elements of his game, his strength, his arm. And one thing that I have been critical about him, and it's not to say specifically about him, but it's about a lot of freshmen, and I've had a chance to talk to a lot of former quarterbacks about this over the last couple months, but especially after on Saturday, is that he did something that has shown his growth, and that's being looking to the left and coming back to the right, going left to right with his read. I think actually yesterday Rattler pointed that out, and I'm so glad he did when he was on GC Live with Wes and Chris. It's because those little things where in high school, we've talked about this many times before. This is something that Luke Doty struggled with when he was at quarterback, when he first got to South Carolina. a lot of these players, they come out of high school and they're so talented where if their first option's not there, they just have this natural instinct just to take off. And they have the speed and they have the skill to be able to do that. Well, what happens once you get to that next level? What happens when you're playing in the SEC? If you try doing that, unless you're Johnny Manziel, unless you're Doug Flutie, unless you're some of these guys, you're not going to be able to always just take off. So being able, and again, small sample size, but seeing Sellers do that in an actual game, not a spring game. And again, I don't care that it's against Furman. The fact that he's going from left to right, coming back, and he's able to still throw that thing on an absolute dime, 60 yards through the air, 60 yards. It was a 50-yard touchdown pass. 60 yards through the air shows me that he is improving. He is improving with little things. Because, again, it's not about, and Perry Orth will tell you this, former Gamecock quarterback, when you're at this level, everyone has a strong arm. Everyone can do this. Everyone can do that. It's about being smart with the football. It's about being able to trust your progressions and being able to read through it. So, again, small sample size, but to see Sellers do that the other night, it should be something that Gamecock fans look at and say, hey, this is just a small sample size of this young man growing and developing.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and that clip went viral too, so certainly Georgia noticed it. I mean, you'd be stupid not to. But I agree. I think we could see him just, and again, the thing that keeps me on this point that we might see the Sellers package is the Doty playing wide receiver, and we're seeing it more and more and more. And all that means is that they are very comfortable with, if Doty, knocking on wood here again, if Doty went down, that Sellers is, more than capable of being the backup quarterback. So that's the one thing that keeps me from saying go redshirt him and all that, because all the talk in the building is positive, and every task that they've given this kid, he's lived up to and passed with flying colors. So he just keeps moving up, and that should excite a lot of people.
And the other thing too that Rattler brought up yesterday with Wes and Chris, and if you guys haven't had an opportunity to listen to that exclusive interview since Rattler is not speaking with the media this week, and that's not something like he said, oh, I'm not speaking. It's just some players don't meet with the media on Tuesday. So if you want to be able to listen to Rattler talk about last week a little bit more after watching the film, on top of looking ahead to this weekend's matchup, go back and visit the Gamecock Central YouTube page. You can see that interview in its entirety with Wes, Chris, and Spencer. But Spencer mentioned, and it's something that gets overlooked so much, the fact that Doty, well, he still is a quarterback. He still is. But the fact that he's played quarterback, there's certain things that he recognizes on the field. And because of the relationship and the rapport that Doty and Spencer have built by being in that same quarterback room together, Rattler pointed out that when Doty recognizes something, and a lot of the times it will be probably some type of option route, when he recognizes something in his route, more times than not, Rattler is going to be able to recognize that too, just because they understand and that trust. So look,
that was big.
Obviously Doty didn't come out of high school as a wide receiver. And I know because of that, just like, the situation with running back with Takarion Joyner, naturally there's going to be people that will get upset when they see DK at running back or they see Doty at wide receiver. Why is this guy in over this guy? We have this guy in here who's a 4-star. Couple things. One, we're not at practice every day. You're not at practice every day. We don't know what everything's going on. Perfect example, Mario Anderson today. I asked him some of his strengths and weaknesses as far as what does he still have to do in order to be able to take that next step? Where does he feel like he's been able to grow the most? And one thing that he mentioned today is mentally he's got stronger. He said when he first got here, and maybe over the last couple weeks, from a mental standpoint, he wasn't where he needed to be. And he's been able to grow. So there's only been 2 games since he's arrived at South Carolina, and he played in the last game, and he got more action. So I bring these things up because I'm not going to be shocked to see Mario used more moving forward, and especially if he's able to have good practices. Having said that, looking at wide receiver, Luke Doty, in his situation, if Luke's able to go out there, and he might not be the fastest, he might not be the biggest, strongest, he might not be the best wide receiver on the field. However, because of his football IQ, because he has that quarterback background, and because him and Rattler think a lot alike based on what you hear what Rattler says in terms of the play recognition and what happened the other night, I'm not going to be shocked to see Doty go out there and play a little bit more. And if he does that, guess what? That opens the door now to getting Sellers out there a little bit more. So, yeah, I mean, everything goes hand in hand. Alan talks about, will DJ Braswell and Anderson see the field? Again, going back with what I just said about Anderson, and you could say the same about Braswell. How are they looking in practice? I know there was a lot of people that were upset week one, and it's really easy to start complaining when you're giving up 9 sacks and the offense isn't able to get into any type of rhythm. But a lot of it has to do, especially with these younger players, but even transfers, what are they looking like in practice? Are coaches trusting them enough? That's another reason why I think we've seen DK out there as much as we have. And DK even said today, he said that, look, before 2 weeks ago, I hadn't played a game at running back before, especially at this level, right? He might have to go back to his freshman year of high school or, youth football. So he's going to gain more confidence. He's going to get better. He even mentioned it today. He has to trust his training. He has to trust the people around him, and he's got to trust his eyes. But as far as Braswell goes, just like I said about Anderson, how is he performing in practice? And he's a freshman. Anderson still has another year, by the way.
Yeah.
People forget that. He redshirted his freshman year at Newberry. 2020 was the COVID season. He still has another year of eligibility after this. So just keep that kind of stuff in mind as we move forward, but especially with these younger guys when we're talking about Braswell.
Yeah, we ain't talking about the game, Mike. We ain't talking about the game. We're talking about practice.
And it's important. You're not Allen Iverson.
Really,
I mean, these kids aren't Allen Iverson. You have to perform in practice. You have to.
You really do. And
you're not Travis Hunter in Colorado. Different situation. You have to perform in practice.
Shane has talked about that, right? People have asked about the wide receiver room, how the depth chart stacks out. He's like, well, for the guys that are on the fringe, it's week to week based on, how you practice. He said Juice Wells could have a bad week of practice and not play as much. Like it really does depend on how you look in practice, how prepared you are for the week. So for Braswell and Anderson, both, I think it is just depending on the week of practice for them. I think DeCarrion Joyner technically still is the number one back, but if both those guys have good weeks of practice, I expect to see them in the game. But if they don't, you're not going to see as much. So it really does depend, especially week to week too, depending on the matchup. Some guys practice better when they have better looks with better defenses and worse, depending on the schemes and stuff like that. So it really does depend week to week.
I expect we'll see. I expect that we'll see Mario out there more based on what I've been hearing and based on what we saw the other night in that small sample size.
Russell is a freshman, by the way.
What's that?
Tyson Russell is a freshman, by the way.
Correct. He had the nice touchdown reception the other night. But if Mario's able to continue to figure things out, which it sounds like he's starting to do, he's going to get used more, especially if DK is not able to have success. I feel like they're going to give DK more of an opportunity simply because they trust him from a passing standpoint when it comes to pass blocking as a running back, which is massive. It is huge. We've said it many times before. That's something that Marcus Lattimore has talked about as well. Being able to have a running back out there that coaches can trust that can block is massive. And that is one of the reasons why Joyner has been able to stay out there. And obviously Doty's doing DK-like stuff now, which is playing practically everywhere on the field. Offense, special teams. I mean, shoot, it's all over the place. Let's get to some of the press conference stuff today, though.
Yeah, 100%.
From Shane. We'll listen to Shane first.
Do you want to hit ads before we do it?
We can hit some ads. We can hit some ads, Joe. How about you hit some ads?
Get it over with before we forget. All right, so first ad of the day, as always, is our good friends over at Liberty Tax. Tax ID is an uncertain feeling you get right before doing your taxes, but you don't have to go through it alone. Tax team at Liberty Tax in Irmo, Lexington, and Columbia will walk you through the process, clear up any confusion, guarantee you'll get the biggest possible refund or your money back. It's tax time. If you're in a hurry for your refund, call the tax team at Liberty Tax. Fast, accurate, and guaranteed. On the other hand, if you think you might be owing Uncle Sam, talk to the Liberty Tax team to make sure you're not paying more than you should owe. They'll find every possible deduction for you. Locally owned and operated, staffed by tax professionals from your neighborhood. Open 9 to 9 on weekdays and 9 to 5 on Saturdays with multiple service options. Start through the Liberty Tax mobile app or through the desktop portal. Make an appointment or just walk in. Give a call to upload your tax documents. When you come in, your return will be ready to review and sign. Give them a call once again on your screen now, 803-462-5576. Once more, 803-462-5576 for all of your tax needs.
And today's show is also brought to you by our good friend Clint Hammond at the Movement Mortgage. If you're trying to buy a home right now, you know how difficult that can be. You're trying to find the best rate. It's not necessarily the easiest thing to do. Well, if you call Clint, Clint can make that process a heck of a lot easier for you, just like he did for former Gamecock quarterback Perry Orth, as well as our very own Wes Mitchell here at Gamecock Central. Clint has been a longtime supporter of Gamecock Central, and he's also been a longtime sponsor of all our GC Live shows, which you can catch Monday through Saturday during football season. Give Clint a call, 807-771-6933, and let him know that Gamecock Central sent you. All right, Shane Beamer today. A lot of things that he said today that stood out to me, but one thing in particular, and maybe it's because I asked him the question, was about the offensive lineman. And this was talking specifically about Tree and talking about Trevon Baugh. So when I mentioned the fact that he kind of hinted at the fact that they'll probably get in there this week, and that's the reason I bring that up.
Also, a little bit athletic, just a little.
But I also think it's important because we keep talking about the offensive lineman. Keep talking about the offensive lineman, and it's so important because when you do have a quarterback like Spencer Rattler playing the way that he is playing right now, it's hard not to talk about the O-line. So obviously this weekend against Georgia, it is going to be a massive task, a massive challenge. But here's what Shane had to say today when asked about his two true freshman linemen who had an opportunity to get in there this past weekend. Opportunity the other night.
Getting out there and playing obviously is huge for them. You know, the moment wasn't too big for him. Tree's got a big smile on his face, like no matter what's happening. You know, he could be getting beat by 28, which I hope that's never happening, or winning by 28. And he's just got the same like happy smile on his face as well. But he is a mammoth guy with really great athleticism, and will continue to get better. Tro was just a mauler in there. I mean, you hear coaches talk about guys having heavy hands, meaning like when they put their hands on you, you feel it. And Tro does when he gets his hands on people also. He's got an edge to him also, you know, which I love. They came out there and played with fight and competitive spirit, which was great to see. Certainly they made they made mistakes, but to be in there, a true freshman playing left tackle and playing guard, pretty impressive. And they will continue to get better. And we know that the defensive line they're going to face this week is different than what we saw last week, you know, against Furman. But just being able to get in there and get game action will do nothing but benefit them.
So there you go, Shane Beamer today, and we'll keep playing some other clips as well. But again, you hear right there, he's like, you know, they'll see some more talented guys than what they've seen, you know, so far, kind of hinting at what the offensive line will look like this weekend. So, if we go back to this past weekend, you had Trevon Baugh at left tackle. You had Nick Gargiulo at left guard. You had Vershawn Lee at center. You had at right guard, you had Luedecke Babalade, and then at right tackle, you had Ja'Kai Moore. We mentioned last week that the possibility of South Carolina moving either Nick Gargiulo to left tackle or Ja'Kai Moore out to right tackle. Ja'Kai started at right guard, and then a couple series in, he got bumped out to right tackle. That was part of what we were hearing from last week. Gargiulo ended up staying at guard. We'll see if that is the case moving forward. Trevon being out there and Tree being out there was a tremendous opportunity for those guys, but we'll see how things play out. We keep seeing the comments here, and Mario Anderson needs to get more carries. I see Mark Anderson. I don't know if this is a family member or not, but I mean, look, it's only been 2 games. He got more carries last game. He got more carries last game. And like I said, if Mario is having better practices and he's performing in practice, there's no question that he's going to see the ball more. There's no question. I love Juju McDowell. I think Juju brings a lot of good things to the table, but certainly you need to be able to have someone that's more of a bruising back to be able to have in your arsenal. And certainly South Carolina has that with Mario Anderson. And it's not just being able to be a bruiser. He's got some speed to him too. I mean, we saw that the other night. So I think, again, getting in there the other night, just like we talked about with the offensive linemen, even though they're true freshmen, with Mario and anyone that comes in here that transfers into South Carolina. I mean, Trey Knox, he's played Power 5 ball. You need to be able to continue to perform in practice. And that's not to say these guys are looking like crap in practice, but it just pointing out the obvious fact that for whatever reason goes out the window sometimes. We're not at practice. You're not at practice. We got to just wait. And it's only been 2 games. So, yeah, I think Mario's going to be fine. I think you'll see the workload go up for Mario moving forward.
Yeah, I agree. And on the offensive line front, I think we've seen a lot of development really early out of Tree and Trayvon Baugh.
And we would see with Marquis Anderson too, but Marquis been banged up. And by the way, Beamer said that he's getting healthier. So continue, Joe, but want to throw that out there.
Yeah, I agree. And Marquis Anderson's another one of those guys, right? The true freshman offensive lineman that came in this year that, you were kind of expecting next year to kind of make that next step, but turns out this year you need him. And I mean, I was impressed with just the way Tree and Trayvon Baugh played on Saturday. I was not expecting that. I mean, no offense to Tree, he's my guy, but I mean, I was really impressed for his, first real action in game. I was impressed with that. I think for a freshman, that's really hard to do. And to be put in this spot where you're instantly expected to develop can be really, really hard on a player. But I think both Baugh, Anderson, and Big Tree, like they've all kind of embraced it really well and kind of picked up the pace. So really, really good stuff from them. I'm happy for Tree. Like I said, that's my guy. So really excited to see him, and he's just going to keep developing, right? I think he has potential to be one of the best, along with Baugh as well. And Anderson, those 3 have the opportunity to be some of the better and more seniority offensive linemen in this program for the next couple years to come. And Mike, we've talked about the 2024 class, how offensive line heavy that is. So to be able to get Anderson, Tree, and Baugh reps and playing time this year, it only sets up the development for those guys next year because they're going to be learning from these 3 freshmen that have seen game action. They're going to be leaders as sophomores, which is crazy to say, but I mean, those O-linemen, this game experience is so vital to the program and just to the future because they're seeing it now. They're going to understand what being a freshman with expectations is like. And so those offensive linemen, Cam Pringle, Josiah Thompson, when they get here, they're going to have this similar treatment, but then Tree and Baugh and Anderson will all have been through it. So they know, and just big stuff for them. I'm excited for all 3 of them. Really, really good people, good dudes, good players.
So I mentioned last night we had an opportunity, a Garnet Trust exclusive, the Garnet Knights Unplugged show that takes place Monday night with student athletes. We had Kat Barry, the women's soccer program, on for the first segment. And then for the second segment, we had, as you can see, big old Nick Gargiulo, the transfer from Yale, offensive lineman for your South Carolina Gamecocks on the program. So I'm going to hop around here with a couple of things that he mentioned. This is the first clip that you're going to hear from him is talking about just being able to have that barometer now, right? You play that first game, you head into Furman, you're able to understand what your team is, better idea of what your team's all about. So that's what he talks about here. And then we'll get into his thoughts about the offensive line, where it's at, as well as his thoughts on the younger players who had a chance to get in the other night.
Yeah, I think as athletes, confidence is crucial, right? And I think that this past Saturday gave the group and the room confidence that we could go out there and we could go compete at a high level. And, maybe we didn't have that coming out of that first game with the results that we put out there on the field. So being able to have confidence going into this week is important for us.
You mentioned confidence. How special is it? And I'm sure you have memories like this when you were at Yale and there were younger players that came in, but especially seeing Big Tree out there, Luedecke and Babalade, Trayvon Baugh go out there and step up the way they did.
because it seemed like when they got into the game, and no disrespect to any of the other offensive linemen, but once they got in, it just seems like there was a rhythm that you guys were able to created some momentum, and maybe outside of a couple garbage touchdowns toward the end of the game that Furman scored, which I don't know if Shane would actually phrase it that way, but I will. I will for him. It just seems like you guys had the momentum for the rest of the game. I mean, what can you say about those young guys that stepped up?
I mean, they work really hard. And so I don't think it was a surprise to anyone on the sideline or in the locker room that they were able to perform to that level. And obviously you mentioned Tree and Tro, and I know Lenorris is getting a lot of hype for the throws.
Well, you were on the play there. And again, offensive linemen, they don't want the recognition, but you were out there on the play. So, you were out there giving them some protection.
Yep. So I'm just so happy for those guys. It's not often sometimes freshmen don't even touch the field, right? And now they took meaningful snaps, made some really nice plays. And, talk about the confidence piece. They should have confidence going in the rest of the season that they can compete at this level.
We mentioned confidence, but when you talk about those two players, unfortunately, Marquis Anderson, he's been banged up, so I'll stay away from them to make sure that we don't get ourselves in trouble here. Yeah. But what have you noticed about those two players in particular in terms of just their growth? Confidence is probably one of the leading things that we'd probably point out at, but what is it about those two that you're really proud about at this point? Obviously, there's still a long ways to go for both those guys in terms of growth.
I think constant improvement, and that's for both of them. They came in, they didn't have the privilege like Marquis did to come in January, right? So they both came in here, got 6 weeks under their belt of summer training, and took that seriously, and were able to recomp their body to be able to withstand SEC defensive linemen, and they continue to improve. They're not the same players that they were a month ago, right? And so they've gotten a heck of a lot better through fall camp, and now through the first two practices. You give them credit. I mean, first two games. I'm sorry. You give them credit. Neither of them touched the field that first game versus UNC. Didn't stop them. They worked real hard and got on the field versus Furman.
You mentioned Lenorris Sellers, and certainly that was the touchdown heard around Columbia, and it was a beautiful throw. But let's talk about the other quarterback, Spencer Rattler. What is it like when your quarterback has the performance that he had the other night when you're an offensive lineman? What is that like, just knowing that your guy is in the zone? If you give him time, he'll be able to get things going the way that he did.
Similar to the young guys, I don't think it was a shock to anyone, right? I mean, he's such a tremendous player and a tremendous leader, and the way he's running this team is remarkable, and we have confidence in him to go out and do that every week, and he's living up to it.
And I know there's no moral.
All right, Joe. There we go. I had a chance to be able to listen to Nick Gargiulo. And look, I think a lot of the things that Nick mentioned, it goes back to things that I know some people didn't want to necessarily hear after the first week, which is for a lot of these guys, they're still growing and they're coming together. And now I know there's going to be some people to be like, well, what do they do during preseason camp? What do they do going back to spring? What happened in the spring game? Starting left tackle went down. So you're trying to figure out during camp who your starting five is going to be. You know, I mean, we could sit here and be like, well, during spring camp, spring ball has nothing to do with it now. Once your starting left tackle goes out the window, you have to figure out a new starting five. It's not as simple as just saying, all right, we're just going to plug in a left tackle. I wish that was the case. It wasn't the case. It wasn't the case for South Carolina. Didn't work. So, and then on top of that, your right tackle in the first two series, I think it was the second series of the game, Casey Henry goes down. So I bring that up because with this South Carolina team, they obviously have a lot of young talent. We're starting to see that on the offensive line. We're starting to see that at other positions as well. But it takes some time. It takes some time. Hopefully they're able to figure it out to a point where they're going to be able to compete against a talented Georgia team. But going up against a Power 5 team, a team that was ranked and will probably finish towards the top in the ACC in North Carolina, despite a challenging game against App State last week that they won in overtime. This is a South Carolina team that has the ability to continue to gain some momentum as the season goes on, but as we've mentioned before, Joe, they're just so young at a lot of positions. Talked about the offense. I want to talk about defense now.
Yeah.
Nick even worry if he's in there. Obviously, that's phenomenal. But I'll say this. So far, the star on defense has been Debo Williams. Debo Williams has been playing out of his friggin' mind. Stone Blanton was running around the other night with like his head was with his hair on fire too. But Debo has been playing so well. And we talked about this last week. Losing Mo Kaba, despite the talent on paper from a depth standpoint, it's a lot of unproven talent in that room. Even a guy like Stone Blanton going into the season, just because he didn't have the number of reps at linebacker in comparison to, say, a Debo Williams or a guy that had an opportunity to start last year. So I think right now, what they did last week, that's what you want to be able to see to give you that confidence. Obviously, the D-line needs to have we talk about the offense that needs to have a fast start. Defensive line needs to have a fast start against Georgia, but it seems like those two levels started to really play well as the game went on, but especially that second level at linebacker, starting with Debo Williams.
Yeah, I agree. I think Debo is going to be huge for this defense this weekend. He's going to be big and just getting pressure on Carson Beck. Beck hasn't really seen a challenging SEC defense yet, and I think Debo Williams and Stone Blanton offer a pretty good challenge to Beck. I think, just the defensive secondary that South Carolina has. Now, what is going to be the tripping point for this defense, or at least the group that needs to play well for them to have a chance, is the defensive front. We've heard how last week against Furman, the front and the line of scrimmage isn't as good as a Division I opponent necessarily. So this defensive line, I feel like Georgia, dare I say, it's a make or break game, or at least early in the season, for if you're going to be judging position groups. I think this Georgia game is you're gonna need a lot out of your defensive line, and if you don't get it, there's a chance they could run the ball all over you. It doesn't matter how well the linebackers play in stopping the run. If the defensive front is getting blown off the ball, you're going to have a long day in Athens. So I think what it comes down to is this defensive line. We know the capabilities of the secondary. Marcellus Dial, like I said, in the post-game show, I was really impressed with him. Just being able to, he got beat early on in the game and then tuned it up. Was able to take accountability for it and then moved on and was lights out from there on. So I think, if this secondary can play like they have been and these linebackers do, the only thing that's missing is your defensive line. And if you can get a push to get some pressure on Beck, try to stop the run a little bit, you have a chance in this game, because we haven't really seen Beck pressured against a real SEC defense. So I think Williams and Blanton are going to have some fun chasing him around, but all of that depends on if the defensive line can do their job, fill their gaps, stop the run. And if they do that, again, it's going to be really fun for guys like Debo Williams and Stone Blanton, as well as guys in the secondary too. You're going to have a new nickel. So it's going to be, defensively, fill your gaps, do exactly what you're supposed to do in the Clayton White defense, tackle. But to me, at least, this game's going to come down to the front seven.
Well, it's not just going to come down to the front seven. It's specifically going to start with the linebackers, because with what Mike Bobo does, and I won't want to get too complex here with terminology, but we know that Bobo likes to do a lot of, pin and pull. And what that means is being able to create those favorable matchups in the run game. So I bring that up because how you beat that, you're going to constantly be sending your backers. You're going to be trying to disrupt that. So guys like Debo Williams, guys like Stone Blanton, if Pup Howard gets in there as well, the linebackers have to play a massive game. But, Joe, you're absolutely right when you say that the front seven as a whole needs to be on their game. There's no question. You have to be able to stop Georgia from being able to get momentum in the run game early, because, look, we know we could talk about Bowers and how just talented he is, because he's essentially a wide receiver in a tight end's body. But if I'm Georgia, similar to what North Carolina did, they have a very talented quarterback. What did North Carolina do, especially for the beginning of the game? They tried to run the football on you. And I think that is what is going to happen this week. Furman last week, You knew Furman wanted to run the football on you. Heading into that game, 3 straight games going back to last season, including the FCS playoffs, that they rushed for over 200 yards. I mean, the crazy thing is that was the first time in 19 games, to go all the way back to 2021, to find the last time Furman didn't rush for at least 100 yards in a game. So, again, it was Furman, but at the same time, too, you were able to do something that no team was able to do, including Clemson. So, I say that because, again, a lot of pin and pull this week by Georgia. Expect that. Backers have to be on their game. They have to be on their game. They're going to pass it. No question they're going to throw and try to pass it. But I would expect them to try to run it down your throat until you can prove that you can stop the run. South Carolina was able to do that last week against Furman. And what happened? Furman had to throw the football. They weren't able to do that really against North Carolina. And that's why I think North Carolina, outside of taking a couple knees, they rushed for over 170 yards because of those kneel downs. They were able to, be under 170. But their offensive line, even though that this is a team that wants to run the football, their offensive line has been shaky at times, Joe. And I think if South Carolina is able to give them some fits up front, I think South Carolina can. And it's a big if, kind of like just talking about with the offensive line. If you can give Rattler time, well, that's a big if. If this defensive line, if this front seven can stop the run, I mean, it's a big if. Having said all that, much like that Israel Mukwamu game back in 2019, and I'm sure you would agree with this, and give me a number, Joe, I think you have to force at least 2 turnovers, if not 3, to win this game. At least.
I agree. I think that I was going to say at least 2, because you can get it done with 2 and a special teams touchdown, to me. But, yeah, you got to force 2, maybe 3. They don't have to all be interceptions. I think it's within Beck's realm of possibility throwing 2 picks. I don't think he throws 3. That third turnover is going to be huge. Like, if you can get that third turnover, your chances to win this ball game are a lot better than the second, just getting the second turnover. You're going to need a special teams touchdown. Mac and Dino made a good point. Good to have you guys on here as well. But Beck also isn't a running threat like Furman, QB, or May. I agree. I think if they do get pressure, we could see him run a little bit. We haven't seen it yet. I don't really know if he's capable of doing it like substantially like the Furman quarterback or May, but I think he's still got it in him, right? He can scramble a little bit. He's athletic. So pressure for Carson Beck, for me at least, is a starting point for this defense to stop the run. Got to stop the run and generate turnovers. I think the secondary is capable of generating turnovers. We saw the O'Donnell Fortune turnover in the bowl game, that massive pick 6. Like, these guys are very capable of taking the ball away. So Mike, you're right. I think you got to force 2, probably 3 if you want to win this game.
Mentioned before that Shane Beamer really didn't want to get into talking about injuries today. In his opening remarks, he said anything injury related, any specific players, everyone is questionable. The only player that he did mention was Marion Brown, who was not at practice today, but he should be back at practice tomorrow. But he kind of pointed everyone back to the players that he mentioned on Sunday during his teleconference as far as injury. So these are the players that are listed as questionable. I think Mac and Dino actually just brought it up, and we talked about it a little bit earlier, saying that Dial mentioned that Nick is, going to hopefully be back. But Eamon Worry, according to Marcellus Stiles, said he'll be back. So we'll see. We'll have to wait and see. But these are the players that are questionable, according to Shane Beamer, based on the Sunday night teleconference. Because, again, didn't get into the specifics today at his his press conference. Marion Brown, again, he'll be back at practice tomorrow. He is questionable for Saturday. Nelson is questionable. Dunn, Morgan, and then Spalding. Anderson, Mario Anderson, that is, and Gear are probable. Based on Anderson speaking today to the media, I think it tells you everything you need to know, unless he has a setback, that he'll be good to go this weekend. And as I mentioned, if he's able to continue to have good practices, I expect him to see an increase in his workload this weekend. But as far as Juice, what's the deal with Juice, right? Everyone wants to know. My thing is, I just don't think he's 100% right now. I don't think he's 100%, but I think they're trying to slowly get him out there. That's why you go back to the Furman game. You're able to see him get going a little bit. I think the North Carolina game was probably more of a force than anything else. We talked about this last week, right? Juice sets a number, was probably a little less than that. If he says he's feeling 80%, he was probably closer to 60%, right? I don't want to be here doing mathematics all night, giving percentages, but it was probably much less than where that 80% was. So where is he today? Well, I mean, shoot giggling.
Oh, this comment. I watched Beck try running the ball against Ball State, and I think my 4-year-old daughter may be faster than him. It's pretty good.
I swear, Mac and Dino, I'm going to take your word. I swear, if I see Beck freaking scamper for like a 20-yard run
on Saturday, Mac and Dino, we're coming for you on the post-game show.
But no, I think the thing with Juice is, with Juice not speaking to the media today, and I said this to Colin beforehand, there's really no reason for him to speak to the media today. Whether he's 100%, whether he's 80%, whether he's feeling like absolute crap and can't play out there. And the reason I say that is this. Obviously, it is a great story. It'd be the story of the day. I mean, that's the story that I wanted to write about going into it. But him and Juju didn't speak today to the media. They were two of the requested players. We get the list. We put the names out this morning saying the players that are slated to speak. He didn't speak to the media. I think by doing that, obviously it makes us fans, it makes everyone feel good. It's like, all right, we finally hear from Juice because we haven't heard from him in weeks. He was supposed to speak at the North Carolina press conference. He didn't speak that week either. But by him doing that, in terms of what's best for the team, what does that really do? You know what I mean? Like, I'm just trying to take a step back. Like, all right, obviously I want to hear from Juice. I want to hear straight from his mouth after a practice, how you feeling, blah, 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 X, Y, Z. But by him not going out there, obviously George is going to prepare for him. But if he goes out there and he's in front of the podium, he says, man, I'm 100%. Or, I'm good to go. I'm this and that. If anything, it just gives more reassurance to Georgia. So I get the frustration from people when it comes to, because this is the thing with college. It's not the NFL. They don't have to disclose injuries. They don't. A lot of gamesmanship. They try to hide stuff. And I don't know if hide's the right word, but they're more, they keep things a little bit closer to the vest. So I think, again, and I said this before, when you deal with an injury like this, and I don't think they have specifically mentioned this publicly, but when you're dealing with a toe injury, and that is what Juice sustained in the offseason, when you're dealing with a toe injury, it's not just about how quickly can he heal and get back out there and being himself, right? It's that pain tolerance as well. How much can he deal with, right? Every player is different. I used the example before. You go back to about a decade plus ago, right? Jackie Bradley Jr. Was it his wrist, I believe? I'm trying to remember now. But he broke his wrist, something like that, and it looked like he was going to be done for the year. I think Ray Tanner, who was the coach at the time, actually came out and said, and I'm paraphrasing, but his career at South Carolina is done. And then what happens? Well, his body healed up a little bit quicker. He was able to deal with the pain. So I bring that up because with Juice, I think he's been trying, and based on what I know from talking to people, and it's not like it's going to be a big secret when I say this part, it's killing him that he's not out there. It's killing him. And I think Beamer is optimistic that he's going to be out there because Juice is telling him, Coach, I feel good. I feel this. I feel that. He's going into getting his treatments done, and the team doctors will relay messages to Shane as well as Justin Stepp, his positional coach. But at the end of the day, it comes down to how your body responds once you're out there. How much pain can you deal with? And I feel like that's what the main issue is with Juice right now, is that he's working back to getting out there and being the Juice of old, but he's dealing with pain. He's dealing with pain to a point that I feel like it's holding him back from allowing him to be the Juice that we all know. Is this the week where Juice is able to go out there and overcome some of that pain? I mean, just like anything in life, when you have any type of injury, but especially a broken toe, you have more time, right? What happens? Well, the body's going to be able to heal, especially if you treat it the right way. And I think that's why we haven't seen Juice really get pushed out there into games.
Yeah.
And Juice might mentally feel like, hey, I can do this. And Beamer might just be saying, hey, we're just going to hold you back a little bit more. Or Justin Stepp, these are the things that we don't know, but that's not being shared at these press conferences. But having said all that, Juice was not one of those players. Juice was not one of those players that Shane mentioned on Sunday night during his teleconference. So take that for what it's worth. Take that for what it's worth. I think he expects him to play this weekend. How much he plays, that's still to be seen. But again, also could be gamesmanship. Trying to let Georgia know or not know who's going to play this week and whether or not Juice is going to play X amount of plays or he's not really going to be in the game plan at all. We don't know yet.
Yeah, I think he does some good as a decoy as well. Having him out there in some way, shape, or form helps. And like William says, turf toe hurts bad. Yeah, it does. Any toe injury, really, especially for a wide receiver, cutting, all that stuff. Like with a toe injury, it's not the same every day, let alone every week. It's an evolving injury. And so one day you might cut on it and it feels fine, ready to go going into the game. And then you're warming up and then boom, it reactivates. And it's just such a wonky thing because it's such a small part of the body. And, it can get activated like that. Just freak stuff. So Mike, I agree. I think he's not 100%, but him being out there in any capacity on Saturdays is helpful to this offense because he will draw the number one corner for Georgia. And with that, it opens up lanes for Xavier Leggett and AB. AB probably will play. And if AB doesn't play as much as we think, you're going to see a lot of Eddie Lewis. I wouldn't be shocked if we saw Eddie Lewis out there returning punts as well. We know he's a dynamic punt returner.
We'll definitely see Eddie back there. We'll definitely see Eddie there. No question.
Yeah. And I'm excited for that because we know his speed from Memphis. Mike, we talked about it he was one of those guys that coming in we thought was going to be really, really, really good and then just kind of went under the rug. But now his work is starting to show through. So Eddie Lewis could be a game breaker on Saturday, and I wouldn't be shocked returning punts and stuff like that. Like Eddie Lewis could be the guy that goes in there and makes a difference in this game. I could be 100% wrong, but I think Eddie returning punts isn't just because AB's out doesn't mean Eddie Lewis is no slump either. Like we saw what he did against Furman, and I think that was just kind of just a glimpse of what Eddie Lewis can do. So good to have depth like that, especially with Doty as well, Doty in the mix. But yeah, it's good to have depth like Eddie Lewis, Luke Doty, when you're dealing with the star player, your star wide receiver's injury, to have depth like you do, that's shown itself through 2 weeks. It's really, really good and should give this offense a lot of hope going into Georgia.
Another player to mention, because I know Gamecock fans were very excited to see him out there on the field, especially when he scored that touchdown from Sellers, is Nicholas Harbor. Nicholas has now been able to put some tape out there for the coaching staff to be able to see. When I say putting tape out there, I'm talking about being out there in a legitimate game, understanding different responsibilities and running your route so that you can go back and you can evaluate that, not just as a head coach, being Shane Beamer, but your positional coach as well. And that, of course, is Justin Stepp. So I say that because, there were people that were upset. And again, I'd still be patient with a lot of these freshmen in terms of expectations. However, going into the first game, you had Harbor, who was banged up a little bit towards the end of preseason camp. So the timing of that did not help. And as Dal Loggins pointed out, and he said this more of in a broad sense, not specifically talking about Harbor, but when you're a young player and you're going out there and you're not able to be at practice every day and you're trying to get caught up to speed as to what your responsibilities are, sometimes you're not going to be able to earn that trust right away from coaches to be out there on the field. So I think when we look at Harbor's situation, I'm not going to be shocked to see him get involved more, especially if that wide receiver room is a little thin. I mean, when you look at it with the injuries that have piled up, it's devastating. But on top of that too, and I see Carolina talking about Trey Knox. That's another player. I mean, both him and Josh Simon. The problem right now with the tight ends, I feel like, Joe, and we'll see what the case is on Saturday. But with how the offensive line performed in week 1, despite the fact that they were able to bounce back nicely last week, in some ways, I'd still give them probably like a C+ overall. But what does it look like now against Georgia? Do you have to bring in a tight end or two to block? Do you have to bring in 2 tight ends to block? So I say that because in another player we talk about with Knox, we don't know how healthy Knox is. I mean, I think, if we had to compare the two, Knox is probably healthier than Juice right now. But, getting banged up with that knee, how is his knee feeling in terms of dealing with the pain? So those are 2 players, Josh Simon and Trey Knox, who have the ability to make some catches, but at the same time, too, you might need them to stay in. You might need them, and might not even just necessarily be those 2 guys. You might have a different tight end out there as well. You might have to do a lot of 2 tight end sets where you're getting some additional help to give Rattler a chance to be able to throw the ball down the field. Hopefully that's not the case, but, again, we've only had 2 weeks. We had North Carolina, where it was just an absolute bleep show. And then you had Furman last week, where things were cleaner. Weren't perfect, but they were cleaner.
Yeah, absolutely. Hit the nail on the head. RL, I guess last comment here. Try to wrap things up. RL says Spencer Rattler can make a lot of money this weekend against Georgia. Absolutely. Absolutely. It's a good point for sure.
I think with Rattler, the way that he performs this weekend, not only can he send a message to the rest of the country and get that draft stock even higher for this upcoming NFL draft in 2024, but even though he probably would still be on the outside looking in just because of the performances at some other schools, he would certainly be throwing his name into the mix with Heisman contention. Now that's obviously, we're going really out on a limb here saying, because again, you got to pull off the upset here, but that's assuming if South Carolina is able to pull off this upset, a lot of it will likely have to do with number 7.
Yeah. I was about to say that too, Mike. I mean, I don't think it's going out on a limb at this point. If Spencer Rattler goes out there, does what he has been doing so far, if they're going to win this game, he's going to throw for 250 plus 300 some odd yards. But if he goes out there and does enough to win this game and does it in true Spencer Rattler number 7, I'm the man style, he should be in the mix for the Heisman. I think his stats, I talked about it a little bit on the podcast. His stats have been really, 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 really good through the first 2 weeks. And his play on the field has been likewise. You watch it and you say, yeah, his numbers reflect how he played. And I think if he goes out there and wins this game this weekend, if he's not in the Heisman mix, I don't know what people are doing. I think it's the bias. There's some kind of bias out there if he's not in the Heisman conversation, if they find a way to win this game. And he, got to keep the turnovers clean. But even then, Mike, if he still goes out there and has a couple turnovers and they win this game and he still has a good amount of yards and a decent completion percentage, he'll be up there in the Heisman rankings. And if he's not, again, I don't know what people are looking at.
Yeah, it's incredible when you go back and just look at his stats so far this season. He's just been playing absolutely out of his mind.
Playing his way back in the first round. Exactly.
He's 55 of 66 for 698 yards, something like that. 3 touchdown passes.
Percentage.
3 touchdown passes and a rushing touchdown. And obviously this past weekend, 25 of 27. The only person that I can think of that had a better completion percentage when you've thrown at least that many passes was what Connor Shaw did couple of years back against Missouri. I think he only had 1 incompletion, but he was around that ballpark of I think it was 24 of 25, something like that. But look, bottom line is this. You understand how difficult this task is going to be this weekend. But for all the people that were quick to judge South Carolina, and maybe they're right. Maybe they're right still. But for all the people that quickly judge South Carolina based on what they saw in Charlotte, week 1 against North Carolina, you have an opportunity now to not only rewrite that narrative, but to send a message to the rest of the college football world. It is going to take everything. It is going to take a clean football game. Like you mentioned, Joe, you have to protect the football. That goes without saying. You have to force some turnovers. You probably are going to have some special teams luck with Pete Lembo ball trying to create something. You have to play, Kevin, perfect. You have to play mistake-free football. You have to play mistake-free football. I think back to last year, and I really felt like it was the changing point. I know Marcus Satterfield was still here as the offensive coordinator. Obviously, he was for the rest of the season. But I felt like Rattler was smarter with the football for the most part after the Georgia game last year. That was game 3, if you remember. He had that really bad interception where he rolled out to the right, and I've compared it to, like vintage Brett Favre throwing it across your body, cross field, and it got intercepted. It was probably one of the worst interceptions that Rattler has probably thrown, not just at South Carolina, but in his career. And I thought about that play there were some other interceptions after, later on in that year. I think there were a couple that hit off wide receivers' hands that led to interceptions. But my point being is, ever since that moment, Rattler has been smarter with the football. Now, this year, new offensive coordinator, a year under your belt. I mean, he's playing on a different level. Can he give South Carolina a chance this weekend? If he protects the football, no question about it. But like we said, and we're a broken record at this point, you have to be able to give him an opportunity. You have to give him an opportunity to make those plays. Because if you don't, it's going to be a long day between the hedges. And hopefully that's not the case. Hopefully South Carolina is able to make it competitive, and anything can happen from there. Probably when I do my picks this week, probably not picking South Carolina. I think they'll cover at least. But that's just based on what we've seen in 2 games of work. For what it's worth, I picked against them against Tennessee and Clemson. I think I picked against them in Clemson. And they won both of those games. So we'll see if they're able to pull it off. Any final thoughts, Joe, or do you think we've hit it all?
I think we've hit it all. There might be a slim chance that I'm the one, I guess, insider that picks South Carolina this week. For some reason,
just doing it to appease the fan base,
or maybe
you
appease Shane,
homer.
because Shane has said he looks at our picks, so maybe we'll see. I don't know. I mean, if I do pick South Carolina, it's a 1-point win. I don't think they blow Georgia out of the water by any means, but I could be wrong.
Now, it would be an awesome win. It's going to be my first time heading out there. Looking forward to heading over to Athens. I've heard a lot of good things.
Tell us if it's loud, Mike, because apparently Tonka Hemingway got blown out of context. I mean, I guess we can close it on this note, but like I was talking with one of my friends who's a Georgia fan. I'm like, Kirby Smart is really, 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 really good at this.
I think I actually
smoke out of nothing.
Let me see if I can find this video, because there's actually a video of both clips stacked on each other. Here it is.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So for those of you that don't know what Joe's talking about, I'm going to bring up the clip and then we'll wrap things up here.
Yeah. I felt like this needed to get talked about before.
Well, the reality is this.
Yeah.
And Gamecock fans have had to deal with it for so long with Dabo Swinney, with Clemson, right? Little old Clemson, when Clemson was winning national titles and, having 10+ win seasons. It's just like, I get it as a coach. You're trying to find anything to motivate either your team or your fan base, yourself, or whatever. This was a reach and a half. But this is what Joe's talking about. Bring up the screen right here. For those of you that aren't aware, back in the spring, Tonka Hemingway, or the summer, excuse me, but at SEC Media Days, Tonka was asked a question about hostile environments and, maybe some of the more hostile environments that he's played at. He mentioned 2 schools. That was it. Kirby Smart made it sound like it was a shot against Georgia because he didn't mention Georgia. But just take a listen.
Way environments are concerned. And in your career so far, what has been the most hostile environment you've played in your time with the Gamecocks?
Ooh. Hostile? I'd probably say like one of the loudest. Texas A&M. Texas A&M a good one. Tennessee can get pretty loud too as well. So between them 2.
What people want to question whether our fans are elite, we'll find out Saturday, right? Sounds like Tonka called them out. So maybe we'll use Tonka for motivation and let him be the one that's spurns our group to come out there at 3:30 and be really loud and fired up. So I certainly hope our fan base will be there. They've answered the bell every single time. I don't know why they wouldn't now.
So again,
It's what he's good at.
I think it's nothing more than a coach just trying to find something to motivate not just the team, but the fan base. Another reason to come on out. It's a CBS game. He understands everything that Shane Beamer does, everything that every coach in the country does. When you're playing on a national televised game, right? Shane does a really good job of it when he says, I know our student section will be out there. I know they'll be loud. I know they'll be. Kirby does it in his own unique way. But in my opinion, kind of a stretch. I get what he's trying to do though, but stretching, man, stretching.
Yeah, when you're the two-time defending national champions, people stop wanting to pick fights with you in the media. So Kirby is doing all he can to find that, the coach's motivational stuff.
He's cut from the Saban cloth. He's cut from the Saban cloth. He was on Saban's staff.
Yes, it's exactly what he's good at, right? He somehow convinced his entire team and program last year that everyone thought they weren't any good. I thought they were pretty good. I mean, winning back-to-back national championships and blowing out TCU in one of the largest lopsided victories in national championship game history, I think they're pretty good. So, I mean, plain and simple, this is what Kirby's good at. I think, it's a little bit of a stretch, but, it is what it is now. Only thing you can do is show up and play. Spot the ball, Mike.
I'll tell you what, though. South Carolina does pull it off. One of the first people I want to camber in front of is Tonka Hemingway. Oh, yeah. I want to hear what Tonka has to say. But
Tonka knows about all this for sure.
But they need to get it done on the field. They have to get it done on the field. If you missed any of our program today, you can head on back to the Gamecock Central YouTube page and watch it in its entirety. If you're not a subscriber, subscribe because it's free. You just hit the little bell too, get a notification anytime one of these GC live shows or any of our videos, including the storyline of the day. We do that every Tuesday and Wednesday when we go to press conferences. But GC live shows, they take place Monday through Saturday during the football season. On Monday, Wednesday, Friday, you have GC live at 2 o'clock with Wes and Chris. 7 o'clock Tuesday nights, intern Joe and myself talking Tuesday nights. On Thursday at 2 o'clock, it is GC Live Afternoon Drive. On Saturday, you have the post-game show, the GC Live post-game show. And then on Sunday, still part of the GC family, you have the walkthrough with Joe, which comes out around 7 o'clock on Sunday night. So again, you can catch all these shows on the YouTube page. If you are a podcast listener, head on over to the Gamecock Central podcast platform. You'll be able to find all these shows. I showed you that interview right there. If you're not a subscriber to Gamecock Central and you want to take a listen to that interview with Nick Gargiulo, it's about 30 minutes long. You can listen to that show in its entirety as well. But again, sign up to Gamecock Central today if you're not already a subscriber. It's just $1 right now. $1 a month if you sign up for that first month. And then I think it is 50% off for the whole year. It is the big game week special. So it's typically like $100, $110. You can get the entire year for 50% off. So I would highly recommend that because it's not just football stuff that you get, the insider information, the Gamecock community on the Insiders Forum. You're getting updates on basketball recruiting, baseball recruiting, everything else in between as well. He's intern Joe. I'm Mike. You appreciate all of you guys who tuned in tonight. If you're heading over to Athens this weekend, be on the lookout for the Gamecock Central crew. Love to say hello to you guys before we head on in to see South Carolina look to pull off an upset that they were able to do in 2019 as they head to Athens as nearly 4-touchdown underdogs. We'll see if they're able to shock the world like they were last fall against Tennessee and Clemson. Have yourself a good Tuesday night and the rest of the week here in Columbia as the Gamecocks get geared up to play the Georgia Bulldogs this weekend.